on Spanish translation, and you'll be able to hear the webinar in Spanish and be able to respond to questions and have them translated back to English as well for the presenters. So thank you so much for our translator behind the scenes. We greatly appreciate it. So hello, my name is Denise Harlow. I'm CEO of the National Community Action Partnership, and thank you again for being part of today's webinar. We're here to talk about the CSBG Annual Report. We know that we've gone through quite a number of processes over the last 75 days or so, and we'll be walking through some of that and where we stand today, what action you can take today, and what we think might happen going forward. So let's go to the next slide, please. So we'll start off like we do everything, right? The community action promise. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. And that is what all of this is all about. All of our feedback to OCS, our feedback to OMB, our engagement of the network is to ensure that our data collection system through the CSBG Annual, I almost called it the IS report, the CSBG Annual Report is truly grounded in helping people and changing lives. We want good data in so we can get a good story out the other side. Next slide, please. And just for folks who have come a little bit late, or I know we're not late, but if you came on after I started talking, we are recording today's webinar. Please use the chat. I think we will have the ability for you to raise your hand, and we can unmute you at any time as well to ask a question live, but please feel free to use the chat window. We also have Espanol translation services. So if you hit the interpretation button, you can hear this webinar in Spanish as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about the background. We're going to talk about the current national sign-on letter and why we're doing a national sign-on letter this time and not a bunch of individual letters. A little bit of an overview of how the national partners have come together on a series of recommendations, how to add your voice and your agency's support to this, and some of the next steps. Next slide, please. So just as a reminder, right? So the CSBG Annual Report, why are we spending so much time thinking and taking action on this? We see this annual report as an important element of the performance management system. It is also part of our performance measurement work as well, right? We manage our performance based on good information. And these reports, this data, this encapsulation of what goes on with CSBG as well as community action writ large is critical to the national story. It's critical at the state level story to talk about all the impact. I see so many state associations, state offices using the agency information at a statewide level to tell their story. It's highly impactful. And certainly at the local level, I think it's a fallacy to say agencies don't use their data because you use your data every day. What we know is that the CSBG Annual Report data and how all of that gets framed up allows you to tie your information directly to some national performance indicators that ties into a national story. All of this is critical to how we tell the story of community action. Next slide, please. So again, some reminders of the 5 steps of OMB clearance. We're almost through this process. So as you know that we go through this process because the federal government has deemed it, right? You cannot collect data from the public that is burdensome to a certain degree. And this is all to ensure the data collection process is not overly burdensome. And we've said last time, right? Cue the laughter because we know this process is burdensome in many ways. And what we've said earlier is that the transition, what was proposed for 3.0, didn't necessarily decrease burden. It impacted the story we were able to tell. So we are in this process, right? The 60-day window was out. They asked for comments on 2.1 and 3.0. We provided comment. At the close of 60 days, they pushed out a DCL that said, we're going to press pause on 3.0 because we got a lot of comments at the last minute and we're in the business of collating all of that and developing our response to those comments. And in the meantime, we're going to release 2.1 for the 30-day clearance process. Now, the 30-day clearance process, our comments will go directly to the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. They're the ones who will decide whether or not they will approve OCS's proposed 2.1, if they will ask OCS to make changes, either based on the comments that the network has provided or other reasons, or 3, they could potentially reject it. Now, we do know that we are currently without an approved data collection system, and we know the clock is ticking. So we know we're all kind of wanting to make sure that this process can continue. But we are in this situation today, and we hope that we have a plan of action to try to influence the process. Next slide, please. And so you may recall, I just said this right, they put out 2.1, which has some slightly modified pieces. And we're going to talk about our response to that. And our response isn't meant to be all encompassing. Now, it's an extensive response, and Terry just put it the Federal Register notice into the chat. You'll be able to see our response. And we talked about really encouraging OMB or OCS, excuse me, to delay 3.0. Now, the reasons as to why OCS delayed 3.0, I cannot extrapolate to figuring out why that would be the case. All I can do is read the DCL. And I know the number of comments that were received at the end is the kind of the framing and the need to ensure that they look at the comments, they read the comments, and they prepare a response to the comments. We asked for continued engagement with the network, right? In our 60-day comment letter, please engage the network during this period of time before you go back out for a 30-day comment window, so we can ensure this data collection process is responsive to the network's needs. But that process is passed. We are now in the 2.1 scenario. Next slide. So this is, again, we'll put this into the chat where you can see our comments for 3.0 and all the public comments. We have that link as well. You can see what everybody submitted. What I don't think is included in that maybe are the comments that were submitted in the listening sessions that OCS did on their own, or initially, right? They did 6 or 7 listening sessions, and you were able to fill out a form or put stuff into the chat. I think they received 90 plus comments in that process, and a ton of comments outside of that process as well. Next slide, please. And so we are in the 30-day window. As I said, they are delaying clearance of 3.0. So our job right now is to comment only on 2.1. Now, we put a lot of our energy into 3.0. So we recognize that we don't have a lot of changes recommended for 2.1, but we do have some things that we wanted to elevate to OMB, and something that we've been asking for several go-arounds. Whenever OCS has made updates to the annual report, the last few cycles have been very immaterial in many ways, but we have consistently asked for some changes. And so we've echoed those changes yet again. Next comment, or next slide, please. So as you saw in our e-newsletter, right, the 4 national partners, the partnership, CAP Law, NASCASP, and ANSERT, the Association of Nationally Certified Roma Trainers, came together with this national sign-on letter. We want to save your energy for when 3.0 comes out for a 30-day comment window. And we'll talk more about that, but we don't know when that'll happen. So we thought a sign-on letter would be the easiest way to go. Your agency can add your comment, add your signature to this letter. We're going to put that into the chat. You'll be able to link onto that. You will need your CEO, executive director's approval if you are not that person to sign the agency on. So we just want to make sure you have an attestation that you are able to obligate the agency to add your name. We have a number of agencies signed on. I want to say 80. Please correct me if I'm wrong in the chat team, but we would love to see more agencies signed on to that. And I know this is really bad timing. We've only given folks a couple of days. We were intentional about when we released our e-newsletter and what we're having today to cross 2 work weeks in the middle of the summer, recognizing that some people may have been at NASCASP last week and took this week off, or Whitflea last week and took this week off, or they were on vacation last week and are working this week. So know that that's intentional, trying to work within the time frame we have. So please, we encourage you to sign on. Thank you, Mary Beth. Yes, 80 agencies have signed on so far, in addition to the 4 national partners. Next slide, please. So that's enough of me talking about all that stuff. You probably want to know what's in this letter that you want us to sign on to. So I'm going to turn it over to Mary Beth Schneber-Remrev, our Director of Organizational Capacity Building, to walk us through the key summary points. Mary Beth?
Thanks, Denise. So I'm going to go through our comments pretty quickly here. This letter is much shorter than our last one, since we're focusing largely on version 2.1. That being said, though, there are some comments in this version of the letter that we also said in 3.0. So some of the points are going to look familiar to you just because of kind of the interconnected nature of these 2 clearances. So The first thing right off the top, right off the bat, that we recommend, well, is just, we firmly believe that the best version of this report is going to be one that includes robust network voice in the creation of the instrument. So essentially, in our comments, we are reiterating our recommendation that OCS use the time that is afforded by clearing version 2.1 to deeply engage with the network to co-create an updated version 3.0 that really represents the work of community action agencies, and it, fulfills the need of the network and truly gets to some of those root causes of the burden that so many agencies feel when they complete the report. So that is something you'll notice in the letter right off. Denise was talking about there are some things in the annual report that every time it goes under clearance, we kind of raise up some recommendations. And our next recommendation is one of those things. A few years ago, when the annual report was updated, a new section was added in Module 1. If you're going, I don't know what Module 1 is, that is usually what your state office, your state CSBG office is filling out. Typically, agencies are not, they might provide input into Module 1, but they're not in Module 1 on a regular basis. But in Module 1, there were some new questions that were added some years ago, asking for states to essentially affirm that they have reported all technical assistance plans to the Office of Community Services within 30 days. And so, typically a technical assistance plan is used when a community action agency hasn't met a requirement of an organizational standard or other contract requirement. And the goal is to really just to provide to come to some joint agreement on the technical assistance that is needed to support the agency to correct issues. So states use technical assistance plans differently. What they define as a technical assistance plan is different. The kinds of findings or issues that might arise that would lead to a technical assistance plan are different. And so, but most often, we see them used for pretty non-serious issues where technical assistance is going to help an agency. We don't think it's necessary or appropriate to report technical assistance plans directly to OCS, just because, they're used so differently across the states. And we're also not sure, that there's any kind of requirement that says that information has to go to OCS. We don't want to, mislead that anyone has any kind of major issues. You guys know the kinds of things that come up in org standards that are not major, that, you probably wouldn't want to be reported, all the way up the chain. So that's the root of that recommendation. Then our next recommendation goes into the work that community action agencies do at the community level, which is part of our statutory purpose. So that, community level work is reported within Module 3. And, we recognize that the current Module 3 reporting is not reflecting the good work of community action agencies, due in part to some of the guidance around Module 3 that only new initiatives can be reported. And then there's been some guidance that Module 3 is optional. And in the annual report, you guys know you only report on the outcomes and indicators that represent the work that you're doing. So an agency would only report in Module 3, if they were doing community level work, the same way that you would only report, an FNPI related to employment if you were doing an employment type of service. And so, we want to encourage OCS to update its Module 3 guidance 1 to allow us to report on the full scope of work that community action agencies do to create change at the community level. And then to clarify that optional nature of Module 3, because all of the data points in some ways are optional to the extent that the work you're doing depends on what your local community assessment is guiding you to do and what your board has decided are your priorities. So moving ahead here, then some of the other kind of key recommendations that we have are, for OCS to work with the CSBG network to develop its reporting guidance and its definitions. Some of that work has happened before with the data task force, which is made up of community action data experts. Who knows better about how the report works at the local level than local folks and state association folks. And so we just recommend that OCS work in concert with the network to create that guidance. One thing one of the key areas of OMB clearance, this whole process, Denise talked about it a little bit ago, deals with burden. So if you look at the Federal Register notice, you're going to see that there is a burden estimate for how much time OCS thinks it'll take a community action agency to complete the annual report. We noticed some changes in the estimates this go around. And so we're asking OCS just to provide some clarification on the process or the formula that they use to determine those burden estimates. It'll kind of help us all understand that process and enable us to give some good feedback in the future. And then, one of the really key sources of burden within the annual report comes from some of the validation processes that happen through smart forms or some of the validation processes within your software. I can feel some of you groaning right now because I know some of you are in this process at this exact moment. That validation, those are those like flags that you might get where it says, hey, this number has changed a whole bunch year to year, or this number should look different because you have, this many people reported over here. And, while those validations are really helpful for catching errors, we recognize that there are some of those validations that create unnecessary burden. Some of those validations you all know might be like for significant variances. Just because of the way that the technology works, if you go from 0 to 1, that would be 100% change. And you might have to provide a comment about why your number has changed just a small amount. So it feels like this would be a good area for us to lean into to make some updates to those validations and do that in concert with network data experts, to reduce that burden. And then finally, we recognize the need for really good network-led technical assistance to support ongoing implementation of the annual report. We have turnover in our agencies. As we get into the annual report and do it over a couple cycles, we have new questions and new ways of looking at things. And so we constantly need good quality, accessible technical assistance to support us in that report. And so we're just recommending that OCS collaborate with the network to develop and deliver that good tailored training and technical assistance. So those are our comments at a high level. A quick summary. And so I am looking at the chat and I haven't seen any questions come in yet. Denise, have you seen anything come in?
I have not seen anything come in.
Are you guys out there? Are you awake? Okay, I see someone has their hand raised. So we will unmute you and allow you to talk, okay? And then you just have to unmute on your end. Is it Jaquita? Jaquetta?
There you go.
But if you're talking, we can't hear you. Might have to use the chat if we're unable to hear you.
See our interpreter unmuted, perhaps.
Okay. So I'll
she's just saying she was here. Yep. Thank you for that. Appreciate you.
Perfect. Got it. All right.
I see, folks, this helped add some clarity to help them be able to sign on to the letter. So that's great.
New to completing the report. I understand and agree with your points. Wonderful. Anything else?
Well, our goal to make it not so complicated, Mary Beth, may have worked, although that's a long document that you all put together, so it's significant. We hope that people will add your name and your agency's name to this list. I think typically when we submit for public comment period to OMB and we call for a national sign-on, we do then sort by state oftentimes, right? So if you want to make sure your state association is aware, we do have the cutoff later this week, right? To make sure that we can try to get as many as possible. That would be fantastic. And do we know how long OCS will take to respond to comments to 3.0? We do not. They said that they've received a lot of comments and are in the process of compiling them and compiling responses. We haven't received any invitation to participate in any conversations. We did send a follow-up letter immediately following the posting of the DCL asking for a meeting to talk and an offer to have a conversation. We have not received a request to meet. I know we did receive that they had received our letter. So we don't know. I will just say this, and we said this to our committee as well, that if it hits later this month, we have a convention in Seattle with so far close to 1,700 people coming. Our bandwidth will be severely compromised at the end of August and early September. So I'm not saying we're apologizing up front, but if for some reason it hits at a really bad time, I hope that the network will understand, and we may need to turn to many of you to kind of carry some of that water for us this go around. So we really appreciate everything that you're doing, the level to which you're paying attention to this. We know this isn't the funnest topic in the world necessarily, but it is what it is. I see
You're
it.
not having fun? Like, come on.
Oh, I am having
It's
tons of
great
fun.
fun. Yeah.
I see a question about module 4 and eliminating module 3. Is that relevant to this letter? Can you clarify that, Mary Beth?
Yeah. So I think, Georgine, what you might be talking about is in 3.0, there was a proposal to swap the two. They weren't eliminating module 3, but they were flipping it. And on the form itself, they were marking it optional. That is not part of 2.1. 2.1 basically keeps the current annual report that we have right now in place. The edits that have been made to it are largely technical, DUNS numbers and things like that. So yeah, not really any substantial changes here in 2.1. I also see this question about where can I get copies of both 2.1 and the 3.0 version. So in the Federal Register notice that Terry posted at the top, in the first one, FRN number 1, which came out in April, that has both 2.1 and 3.0. Also on we have an annual report site on the partnership site right now. Both versions are posted there as well, and we'll post a link to that. What else we got?
Oh, thank you, Georgine. I see getting ready to sign on. Fantastic. And I saw somebody else from a state office said that they've signed on. We'd love to see more state offices signed on as well. That's great. Encourage your friends and colleagues.
Denise, there is a question about sending the slides for today's meeting. We will post the recording and the slides in the next couple of days, so they will be out there quickly.
Yep.
And I just see some comments about, agreeing about some of the challenges around, asking about variances, the importance of community work, the recommendation on technical assistance plans. So that's great. Denise, maybe do you want to talk about signing on to our letter? And that'll give folks a couple more minutes to get
Sure.
questions in
The
the
next
chat.
slide. Yep. So I think Terry's put the SurveyMonkey link into the chat a few times, but if you don't have the link, you can always type it in. It is very simple, couple of questions so we can list your agency by state and full name. So we'd love to see that. Next slide. You can also submit your own comments. If you want to send your own letter, you're certainly welcome to do that as well. We're not doing a big push because again, we're trying to save what bandwidth we have with the network for a response to 3.0, assuming that it'll be coming. Public comments are due by July 29th, but Mary Beth may have mentioned this. I just want to echo. The reason why we are sending as soon as we are is because OMB will move very, very quickly, would be our understanding. And so we want to give OMB as much wiggle room as we possibly can. With OCS, it was more of a, we want to make sure we take as much time as we need because we weren't given a lot of time to dig through all of those changes. But with this 2.1, we really wanted to move as early as possible. So if you are submitting yourself, please submit as early as possible as well. And next slide, please, which I think is just our contact information. If you don't know how to contact us, Google us. We're very Googleable. LinkedInable, tweetable, whatever. So love to have your thoughts and comments. But sign on deadline again is the 19th, which is 2 days from now, which is Friday, COB. We'll even take COB Hawaii time or Mariana Islands time. We have CSBG going out all over the US. So all right, thank you, everybody. I don't see any other questions coming through, so we want to make sure we give you your time and not take it up when we don't need to. We appreciate you. I do kind of hope that this other 3.0 doesn't happen till this fall, but if we see you before Seattle, if we don't see you before Seattle, hopefully we'll see you in Seattle. So thank you, everybody. We appreciate you. Have a good rest of your summer. Stay cool out there. Take care. Bye-bye.